Ms. Roberts, you've seen that video before?
Yes, I have.
Is that you and the defendant and Ms. McCabe going into Meadows?
Yes, it is.
When you came out of Meadows, did you have a chance again to look at the defendant's tail light on her Lexus?
Yes, when we left the house, she pointed it out to me.
Did you stop and get a closer look?
Yes, I did.
I want you to describe to the jury your best memory of what it looked like.
Karen pointed out and said, look, my taillight. And she said, do you think I hit him? And I said, no, I don't think you hit him. What are you talking about? Let's just go find him. But the taillight itself, the piece was missing. And as you got closer, there's a metal sort of square, and one of the pieces was sort of sticking out. And I only remember it because I thought if someone walks by that, they're going to catch their jacket on it.
How long of a time did you have to actually look at the taillight?
Under a minute.
How close were you to the taillight when you looked at it?
I was in front of it. I could see.
And when you talked about the taillight, you said a piece was missing. Is this the left side or the right side of the Lexus that you saw the piece of the taillight missing?
It was the right side, so it was the passenger taillight.
May I approach?
Yes.
Should I remain, Your Honor? Sure. Thank you. May I recognize what is in that photo?
That is Karen's SUV.
Is it similar or a fair and accurate depiction of how you saw the vehicle that morning?
Without the snow, I can't be positive, but this square piece was missing, as is in this picture.
The photograph you look at is not the car in the snow in the driveway the day you saw it.
Correct.
Putting that aside, is that a fair and accurate depiction of the damage that you saw to the right rear taillight of Ms. Reed's car that morning?
Yes.
I move to introduce this as an exhibit, please.
Any objection?
No objection.
Exhibit 13.
Thank you. With the court's permission, I'd like to publish Exhibit 13.
Sure.
Ms. Roberts, I'm going to ask you to take a look at the photo that you just described. Do you see the white area in that photograph?
Yes.
Is that where the taillight had missing part?
Yes.
And where was the metal in relation to that white part that you see?
If you look at the white part, it's the upper left. It's sort of like a rectangle, but it's vertical, sort of.
And that's the metal part that you were concerned about?
Yes, one of the side, it's almost like an encasement, but the right side, I think it was the right side, was sticking out a little bit, like out from the car toward me.
Did you express any concern about the metal sticking out?
Yes, because I thought at that height it could clip someone's coat or something if they were walking by.
You mentioned the defendant asked you if you thought she hit somebody.
Correct.
How many times did she ask you that?
She asked me that in the driveway. How many times? She said, do you think I hit him? Do you think I hit him? And my answer was, no, I don't think you hit him. I'm sure you hit something because your taillight's broken, but I don't think you hit him. Why would I think that?
Did you have any reason to think at that point that she hit anybody?
No.
Did she ever repeat that phrase or question in the same or similar manner again that night?
She did at the scene where we found John.
Before or after you found John?
After we found John.
Okay, so we'll get to that then. Could we please take that picture down, Ms. Gilman? How far of a ride is it from Meadows to Fairview?
I don't know, maybe 8 minutes.
So when you left John's house at Meadows and you traveled to Fairview, you said you were driving.
Yes.
Was there any comments or conversation from the defendant on that ride?
There was talk of Bella's mom, who lived near Jen's sister. There was talk, and I said, where is Fairview? And Jen said, it's off of Chapman, so it was near Spring Lane. And I knew of somebody previously that John had dated on Spring Lane, so I brought it up thinking, could he have gone there if he was walking home? I don't know. I didn't know where he was or why he was missing.
Describe the mood in the car.
Well, it was scary driving, and Karen was, frantic, and she was yelling. I don't even remember at this point what she was yelling, but she was yelling. She had an elevated voice. She would be in between us while I was driving, and she would sit back in the back seat and be in between us.
Did you have any words with Miss Reed?
I told her to shut up several times because I was trying to drive and I couldn't concentrate. I told her to sit back and buckle up because it was bad driving. I didn't want to get into an accident and her not have a seatbelt on.
How often was the yelling on the way to Fairview?
Oh, several times. It was like you couldn't control her, and I was trying to drive in a blizzard.
You went down Spring Road before you get to Fairview?
No, Spring Lane is before Fairview off of Chapman.
And did anything remarkable happen on Spring Lane?
I'm sorry?
Anything remarkable happen on Spring Lane?
No.
More of the same?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned yesterday that when you got to Fairview, the defendant began kicking your door.
Yes.
When you looked out, you didn't see anything.
I did not.
And at some point, you ran over to where Miss Reed was.
Yes.
Tell us what your first observations are when you get close to the defendant.
Well, it was a shape of a body, like the length of a body, shape of a body. She ran over, and I said, oh, my God. I jumped out of the car. I ran over, and she was lifting up his shirt to try and warm him, I guess. So I went over to his head, and I began to dig his head out of the snow.
Can you take us back and describe for us what you're seeing?
His body was completely covered, but his head was completely covered. So I started to dig around his face and his eyes, and his left eye was fine, but his right eye looked like it was huge, like he had something happen to it. And after that, I told Karen to get off him. We were going to start CPR. I had been certified at work through the American Red Cross, so I knew chest compressions were more important. So I started to do chest compressions, and I yelled to Jen and told her to call 911. Karen was trying to do mouth-to-mouth. I don't know if she knew what she was doing, but I knew chest compressions were more important, so I concentrated on that. I yelled for Jen. I carry blankets. I have 2 kids, so I carry blankets in the car, so I yelled to Jen to get the blankets. I don't know what I thought I was doing with blankets, but I wrapped them around his head, just thinking, we're trying to warm him up. He was covered in snow.
When you first ran over, you mentioned that his head was covered in snow. Was his head fully covered in snow?
Yes.
When you looked down, could you see who it was at first?
At first, no. I had to dig him out.
When is it that you realized that this was your friend John?
When I cleared the snow off his face.
Did you feel his skin?
Did I feel what?
His skin.
Yes.
Okay. And could you tell us how it felt?
It was cold. Like he had been there in the elements for a while.
You mentioned that his head was covered with snow before you brushed off the snow. Was other parts of his body still covered in snow?
Yes.
Can you share with us what you saw?
His legs were covered. His arms were by his side. He was on his back. Karen had lifted up his shirt, so now his shirt was down, but I was doing chest compressions so you could see his clothing. He had blood coming out of his nose and his mouth. And when I put the baby blankets under the back of him, there was blood on the blanket, so I think he had a cut on the back of his head.
Was the blood from his nose and mouth frozen or running?
I don't think it was running. It was not gushing.
You said that you brushed off the snow from John's face.
Yes.
Did you brush it off from both sides?
Yes.
Did you brush it off to the extent that you uncovered his entire face and head?
Yes.
So, did you have gloves on?
No.
Bare hands?
Yes.
And that's how you felt the temperature of his skin?
Yes.
When you brushed off both sides of his face, did you ever feel any pieces of glass sticking out of his face?
No.
Did you ever see any pieces of glass sticking out of his face?
I did not.
How long did you give chest compressions for to Mr. O'Keefe?
Oh, I can't be sure. I would say 4 minutes, 5 minutes. while we were waiting for the EMTs. I had Jen take over at one point, and then the EMTs came. So however long it took for them to get to us, 6 minutes.
When you were trying to save your friend John, did the defendant say anything?
She was just running around screaming, "Kerry, Kerry, Jen, Kerry, Jen."
Was anything said at that point about her taillight?
About what?
Her taillight.
No, when the EMTs were around and they were working on the body, she was running around and saying, "Did I hit him? Did I hit him? Is he dead? Is he dead?"
When you were waiting for the police and EMTs, just briefly, what was the temperature like and the visibility like?
The temperature was freezing because I remember at one point I couldn't feel my knees, which is why I had Jen take over. And the wind was still whipping and the snow was still coming down.
At some point, did help arrive?
Yes, they did.
And when help arrived, what did you do?
I stood back and watched them work on him.
Did you see first responders trying to give first aid to Mr. O'Keefe?
Yes.
How long were you outside for that morning?
At that point,
Well, the entire morning.
maybe a half hour.
When the first responders were trying to save John, what else were you doing?
I was calling my husband. I called my mother. When they put him in the back of the ambulance, I then made a call to Mrs. O'Keefe. I think I called Mr. O'Keefe first, but he didn't answer. So I called Mrs. O'Keefe and told her John had been in an accident. And she screamed, "I can't do this again."
What did you do after that phone call?
The police put Jen and Karen in the back of a cruiser. And I was looking in the ambulance to see what was going on with my friend. So I was standing outside of the cruiser. They were inside. I was standing outside just watching. And Karen was saying, is he dead? Is he dead? Is he dead? And I said, "No, they're working on him. I can see tubes moving. I can see them moving. Something, if he was dead, they wouldn't be working on him." She grabbed the front of my shirt and said, "Are they working on him?" And I said, "Yes, they're working on him." At this point, I think I was in shock. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't think he was dead. I thought they could save him. I knew he was in the EMT, in the ambulance with the EMTs, and I was just hopeful that they were going to be able to do more than I could.
You said that at one point, Ms. McCabe and the defendant were in a car, and then you mentioned at some point the defendant grabbed you. Did she grab you when she was in the car or out of the car?
She was in the car. I was outside of the car.
At some point, did the defendant and Ms. McCabe get out of the car?
Yes.
Did you go over to the ambulance before it left?
Did I go over to the ambulance?
Before it left?
No.
Did you watch?
Yes.
At some point, did you see the defendant get out of the car, the police cruiser?
No, I didn't see them get out, but they were out at one point.
They were what?
They were out of the vehicle, but I didn't watch them get out. I was watching the ambulance.
At some point, you saw them out?
Yes.
And did they watch, or were they near you when you were watching the ambulance?
Did what?
Were they near you when you were watching the ambulance?
I don't know.
No.
I wasn't concentrating on either one of them. I was concentrating on my friend in the ambulance.
When you were trying to save Mr. O'Keefe, did you ever see any signs of life?
I did not. And I checked his pulse. No, I did not.
After the ambulance took John to the hospital, tell us what you do next.
I left. I told Mrs. O'Keefe, I said, "I'm going to come get you." She said, "Well, I'm going to have Braintree Police take me to the hospital," which was in Brockton. And I said, "They're not going to take you to Brockton. I will come get you," because neither of their cars had four-wheel drive. So I asked if I could leave, and they said, "Give me your number, and we'll follow up with you." And I took Karen with me. We drove down the street. At some point, she was on the phone with Erin O'Keefe, John's sister-in-law, and Karen was saying, I think he's dead. I think he's dead. I grabbed the phone and I said, I don't think he's dead. He's in an ambulance. He's been in an accident. At this point, I didn't know what was going to happen. At some point in the car, as we're driving, she was on the phone with her mother. And I think when we were driving, we got all the way to the elementary school. And Karen said to me, if anything happens to John, I'm going to kill myself. You're going to have to take care of the kids. And I said, nobody's dying. Nobody's killing themselves. Let's not think about that. And then one of the officers called me and said, do you have Karen Reed with you? And I said, yes. And he said, could you please turn around and bring her back? Her parents are saying that she's suicidal, so we're going to take her to the hospital and section her. I said, okay. I didn't get far, so I turned around, went back. At some point, she was on the phone with her mother, and I got on the phone with her mother and said, I'm going to be heading to the hospital. Let me give you my phone number. It's the same hospital John's at. I'm assuming they're going to the same. That's where Canton takes everybody. And her mother said, please make sure that they don't let her have her bag. There are things in her bag, medicine I don't want her to have. So I said, okay, I will. So we got back to the house, and she got in the ambulance, and one of the EMTs asked me for her phone, so I handed that over, and I said, the mother wants to make sure that she does not have her purse because there's medication in there that they don't want her to have.
Did you see the defendant leave with medical personnel?
Yes, I did.
Before we move forward, I want to step back for just a moment. Did you see when the medical personnel, the first responders, lifted John from the ground and then put him on a bed?
Yes.
Shortly after they moved John from the ground and brought him to the bed to bring him to the ambulance, did you go back to where John lay when you first saw him?
Yes, I did.
Why did you go back to the spot where John was lying when you first saw him?
When they lifted him up, there was grass underneath him, and I could see his phone. So I went over and picked up the phone and the 2 baby blankets that were left on the ground.
So let me ask you, when you went back to where John was lying on the ground, you said you saw grass. There was not snow under him?
No, there was not.
Was there many inches of snow around that area?
Yes.
But none where he was lying under him? You said you picked up a couple of items?
Yes.
Could you repeat that again, what you picked up?
I picked up John's phone and 2 blankets, the blankets that I had Jen get out of the car.
What did you do with John's phone when you picked it up from the ground?
I put it in my pocket and gave it to a first responder when they came over, or I handed it off to a first responder.
And the blankets you picked up, were they in the ground area or on snow as well?
They were, I don't remember.
Okay. How long after you put the phone in your pocket, do you remember when you gave it to a first responder, how long you had it for?
I don't remember.
Do you remember the time that you picked up the phone?
I do not.
Have you seen video of that event?
Yes.
And does that video have times when you went over and picked up that phone?
Yes, but I don't remember, somewhere around 6:12, 6:19.
And you don't know how long you kept it in your pocket before, until you gave it to a first responder?
I do not.
At some point, did you get in your car during that morning before you left and drove from the scene?
Yes.
Do you know if John's phone was still in your pocket when you first got into your car?
I don't know.
Was your car heated that morning? Did you keep
Yes.
it running?
Yes.
And was the heat
I
on
think
it?
I kept it running the whole time. I don't even think I shut it off.
I see. I want to now step forward to where you left us when you said that you had spoken to John's mother, Peggy. And did you decide what you were going to do next?
After I dropped Karen back off at 34 Fairview to get in the ambulance, I then made my way to Braintree, barely. I was on the highway. I was the only one on the highway. I spun out a couple times.
Can you describe what you mean by spun out?
Well, the driving was, no one else was on the road. The driving was horrible. So I spun out almost at the Braintree exit to get to their house. And then I got to the O'Keefe's house, and I said, we are not taking the highway back to Brockton. We're going back roads, which is a much longer way, but there was no way I was putting us in the car and that treacherous.
When you went to the O'Keefe's house, you mean Peggy O'Keefe and John O'Keefe Sr.'s house?
Yes, John's parents.
That's different than Meadows Road.
Correct.
When you got to their home, did you go in?
Yes, for a second. They were ready and waiting for me. They wanted to get to the hospital.
When you say they, can you tell us who was waiting for you?
John's parents, Mr. and Mrs. O'Keefe, were waiting.
What happens next?
Mr. O'Keefe said something about a Dr. Rice and that they were trying to warm John up. We got into the car. Mr. O'Keefe got in my passenger seat. Mrs. O'Keefe got in the back seat. Mrs. O'Keefe's niece worked at Good Samaritan, so we were trying to get in touch with her to see if we were going to be allowed in because there was still COVID restrictions. John's brother was already on his way there, and Mr. O'Keefe at some point said, "He's gone, Peg," and he slammed his hands on the dashboard. But they didn't actually know if he was gone yet. At one point, Karen called me from the ambulance, and on the phone, Mrs. O'Keefe said, "Karen, what happened?" And she said, "I left him at a party." And Mrs. O'Keefe said, "And you just left him?" And Mr. O'Keefe said, "All right, that's enough. She's been through enough." Then we hung up with her. I said, "We're on our way to the hospital."
Let me ask you a question. When the defendant said that she left him, did she say whether she left him outside or inside?
No,
Was the question, follow-up question, never asked?
no.
Okay. Was there any other conversation with the defendant at that point?
Not in the car, but when I got to the hospital, she called me multiple times from the hospital room.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
How long did it take for you and the O'Keefes to get to the hospital?
I would say maybe 45 minutes to an hour.
Share with us the mood in that car.
I think I was in shock, and I think they were in shock. There wasn't, other than talking to Mrs. O'Keefe's niece, trying to find out if we could go in for COVID reasons, there wasn't much talk.
When you finally get to the hospital, take us through your first steps. What happens?
We finally get to the hospital. We walked in. Paul, John's brother, was there. We went over to him, and then Susanna, Mrs. O'Keefe's niece, came out from her office and offered to take me to the bathroom to wash up because I had blood all over my hands. So I went into the bathroom, and I asked her afterwards if she could take me to the chapel so I could say a prayer. So she did. She took me to the chapel, and then when I came out, she took me into her office and explained to me that a Dr. Rice was going to come talk to the family and take them into an office and talk to the family, and then the family would be able to go see John.
Did you get a chance to see John?
I did.
Would you be willing to tell us a little bit about what you saw?
Objection.
I waited in the waiting area. I spoke to my mom. Phone calls were coming in because people had heard what happened. And Mrs. O'Keefe, the family went in to see Dr. Rice. I watched them go in. I watched them walk down a hallway. And then when they came back out, Mrs. O'Keefe told me he was gone.
Objection.
Strike that statement, folks. So part of it.
Without telling us what anybody said to you, please just share with us what you saw.
I went into the hospital room, and John was in a neck brace. At this point, there was a trail of blood going toward the gurney or the bed that he was on. This time, both eyes were filled with blood. They looked like raccoons. That's the only way to describe it. I thought he was going to look better seeing him in the hospital because he had been worked on, but he was not. There was much more blood.
Were there any other ways that John looked different in the hospital than when you first brushed the snow off his face in the front of Fairview?
When I brushed the snow off his face, his left eye was fine. It had an ice cube on it that I pulled off, but the right eye was out to here, like a golf ball. When I got to the hospital, both eyes were swollen with, it looked like blood. They looked purple.